Hey all, Shane here. After my last video, I had some questions asking about the Autoprinter and how it works more specifically. So this is a little video put together just to show you how that works. What you see in front of you here is just a very simple example with a single resource canister. For the whole thing to work, you would need to have a platform with a canister for each resource that can be used by the printer that you want. So in this case, I have a small printer. So you would need one resource canister for each type of resource that the small printer can use, or at least for the items that you want to be able to print. Personally, I want to be able to print any item, so I need a resource canister for every resource that the small printer can use. The medium and large printers use different resources. They're not all the same. There's some resources that are not used by certain printers, so you just have to look at the printers and the items in each printer and see what the complete list of resources is to set up your full auto printer. The basic idea of the auto printer is that you can select an item that you want to print, and without having to manually supply any resources, the printer will print that item by having the resources put automatically onto the printer for you, which really simplifies the process of printing items. So this is just a basic example with one resource, so we can just go through the details of exactly how that works. So like I just said, the idea is that you can select an item. So to use the auto printer, that's just what you're going to do. You'll select the item you want to print on the printer. In this case, it's just a medium storage, uses 2 resin. That's it. You're only selecting. You're not going to print from here at all. You don't need the repeating print to be turned on. You're just selecting the item, and then this whole series of buttons and repeaters does the rest of the magic. So if I hit this button here, it's going to trigger the entire process. You can see the resin is put onto the printer automatically. The canister is then turned off so that extra resources go back into the canister, and the printer is triggered to immediately start printing that item. So that's the entire concept right there. It's no more complicated than that. How it works is a little more complicated. And anybody watching this who has some experience with button repeaters and count repeaters and delay repeaters is going to right away see that there are probably some inefficiencies in this. I will tell you, I have played with this setup extensively, and this was the simplest setup that I could devise that works consistently. It seems like there are more components here than are really needed, and I agree with that assessment, but this was the only setup that I could come up with that actually works consistently. So if somebody's able to come up with a simpler setup that works consistently, I'd love to know. Let me know in the comments, and I'll definitely check it out. But for me, this was the simplest one I could come up with. The only button that is truly unnecessary in all of this, the way I have it set up, is this button right here. And the only reason that this button exists is so that it's very clear what you need to interact with to start the whole thing. So in theory, the rest of these could all be hidden in behind somewhere, behind the auto printer or somewhere out of sight. And then you would just have the one button here in front that would be the button that you use to activate the whole thing. I've laid it out just right here so that we can see it more easily, but the next time I set one up, I'll definitely set it up that way, just to keep it a little neater and tidier looking. But essentially, there is, so just our trigger button, that is just triggering another button. That button then goes to a segment that has 3 pins coming off of it. One that goes to the platform that all of the resources and the printer are located on. One that goes directly to the printer itself, and then a third that goes over here to this delay repeater. The reason that we need it going to the platform and the printer is that when the platform is, we want to trigger the platform firstly to change all of the canisters to output mode. That pin is also going to trigger the printer. But we're actually not ready to trigger the printer yet, because at that point in the process there are no resources on the printer. So the second pin just immediately disables the printer from running. And we'll come back to activating it again after in a little bit here. The delay repeater is just set to 25 cycles, which is the maximum. Just gives the printer enough time to, or sorry, the resource canisters enough time to output all of the resources that the printer might need. 25 is going to be enough time for 2 resources of the same type to exit the canister, which for some items like the medium storage is going to be important. So I've just set to 25. You could probably set it a little bit lower and experiment with exactly where it needs to be set just to keep the whole thing running as quickly as possible. But at 25, it's certain that it's going to work anyway. That delay repeater is then connected to a count repeater that is set to a count of 2 and is already been activated once. So you can activate your count repeater just by hooking up a button to it, pressing the button, and it will activate your count repeater to a count of 1. The reason we do this is that we want the count repeater to activate on the first triggering, not on the second triggering, and to not activate on the second triggering, whereas in the default setup, the count repeater will wait for 2 triggers before it activates. So just keep that in mind as well. The count repeater is then going to a segment pin that is connected back to our sort of central button here, which is again going to activate the platform and the printer. So this is now what's going to actually collect the resources back into the resource canisters, and we're still not going to print anything. I'm just trying to keep this all straight in my head while I'm telling you, so that's why I'm pausing a little bit here. So all that's going to do is just collect all of the unused resources back into the canisters. So just turning the canisters back into input mode, not output mode. And then the segment also goes to another button that is simply relaying a pin back around to the printer. So that's what actually then triggers finally the printing. I think the reason this all works and that we need this extra button here, if I remember correctly, is just that this transmission through the other button just introduces, again, a little bit of delay. This could probably be done with a delay repeater instead of a button repeater, but I haven't experimented with that. So I'm going to put an image, a chart showing this entire setup in the description of the video, so you can go and check out that image and it will show you this entire setup, or you can always come back and just check out this video again if you want to as well. So that's the basic concept. It just releases resources from the resource canisters. The printer is going to pick up the resources that it needs for the item, and then it's going to print that item, and then, sorry, it's going to put the resources back, any unused resources back into their canisters and print the selected item. So that's the basic idea. So over here I have a more complete example. This is a little more like what you see in my previous video showing the auto printers, where I don't really explain them at all, but just sort of gloss over the concept a little bit. This is a more complete, but still not totally complete example. Here I've got 5 resources set up. And so in my main base, this is essentially the way I have it configured. So it's exactly the same idea. Over here we have our buttons, our repeaters, all of that is all configured here. I have my printer so I can select an item that I want to print, and my resource canisters that are ready to go. So it's exactly the same concept. The only difference here really is that this is then also connected to a back-end resource storage. This is kind of important for the auto printer to work because the auto printer canisters need to be full, or need to not ever be empty. If at any point a resource canister is empty and you trigger the printer, or there's only like 1 or 2 resources in the canister, and when you trigger the printer the canister becomes empty, when the process runs to gather the resources back into the canisters, the empty canister is going to start grabbing a random resource. And then you're going to have to manually go to that canister, empty the resources out of it, put them back where they're supposed to be, and fill that canister back up with the resources it's supposed to have. In this example, because there's only 5 resources, it's pretty clear to see the green band indicating that these are all full. Or if they're not full. So you might look at this and go, well, that's just easy. I can just keep an eye on that and fill it back up. The full printer has, I don't even know how many resources on it. It has 3 of the large storage silos, each of them full of resource canisters. So there's a lot of resources and it's really jam-packed. You cannot clearly see any one canister in it. So this additional layer of complication just ensures that your canisters are always going to have resources in them. So I'll just walk through how this all works as well. So typically for me in my base, this resource storage here would be part of a resource sorter, which you can kind of see I have set up with these arms. There would be, these arms are actually taking resources out of the canisters and putting them onto the train. But I would normally have other arms pointing the other way that would actually be collecting resources to put back into these canisters. What this allows, though, is that anytime our canisters on the printer are not full, I have the storage sensors set to full, not full. What's going to happen is the sensor is going to turn on this power switch, which will power the appropriate arm for that resource type. That will put that resource onto the train will move it over, it'll get grabbed by this arm and put onto this empty slot on our platform, where the canister that already has that resource type will automatically grab it and store it. So that's all that the rest of this is doing. But what that means is that these canisters on the printer will always be full, and I can just monitor my canisters over here in my resource sorter, or my back-end resource storage, to make sure that these are always have some resources in them. And if these don't, it's not a big deal. These aren't going to grab resources like the canisters off the platform will. So it just makes that end of things a lot easier to manage. And then in my base, like I mentioned, I would normally have these canisters would be tied into a whole sorting system, so that I can just place resources into one centralized location, and those resources will go out via train to all of these storage canisters and get sorted automatically into the appropriate canister, so that when the printer needs it, it's always available. So that just shows sort of more the whole concept. These splitters are just splitting off the power from the platform so that we can get power to the arms. I use power instead of buttons to trigger the arms on and off, because I have found that too many buttons, and too many buttons with long runs, become really unstable and actually make the entire game really unstable, whereas power does not. You can have as many power extenders and switches as you want, and I haven't had any issues either with having lots of storage sensors running. But for some reason, long runs of buttons seem, for me anyway, to make the game really unstable. So I always prefer controlling things with power rather than with buttons when I can. So that's the concept. And then just like on the other printer, if I hit this button, it's just going to take the resource out and print our item. I'm assuming that I have everything set up properly here. I think I do, so I don't know that I've actually tested this one, but we'll try and see what happens. So that is going to start printing my platform, and you'll see already there's a resin circulating on our train over here. Which is now getting grabbed and placed on the platform. And our printer didn't get deactivated. Anyway, it's going to fill back up our resource canister. Normally this would be deactivated so that this doesn't happen. I obviously haven't set something up quite right on this one, but that's okay. Normally that would work. As you can see over here, no, why did that happen? It happened just because that's just grabbing a whole bunch of resources. So the way that I have dealt with this is that actually in my base there's actually another arm over here that will grab any extra resources that are sitting over here and just stick them back on the train. And that just prevents this from happening, because what happens here is that if I then switch to a different item that doesn't need resin, that resin goes back onto the platform. So as long as there's a couple of slots that was available over here for those resources, they're just going to pop back over the platform, and the other arm will just make sure that they get back onto the train and go back into the centralized storage. So you end up with some resources bouncing around. I kind of enjoy that personally, because I like to see my base be really active and doing things all the time with the automation. But anyway, that's essentially how the auto printer works. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions. I'll do my best to answer them. I can make follow-up videos as well if I need to. So check it out, try it out, let me know how it goes.